In the bustling neighborhood of Cedar Heights lived a woman named Maya who was known throughout the community for her gentle nature and respectful demeanor. She was a librarian at the local community center, quiet and thoughtful, never one to raise her voice or speak harshly to anyone, no matter the provocation. Yet within the walls of her husband's family home, she was treated like an unwelcome guest who had overstayed her welcome. From the day she married David Chen, a successful insurance agent, the criticism had flowed like a relentless river. David's mother, Mrs. Chen, had made it her mission to remind Maya daily that she wasn't worthy of their family name. His younger sister Lisa, barely out of college, mocked her at every opportunity, while David himself, who should have been her protector, merely laughed along as if their cruelty was nothing more than harmless entertainment. Most evenings, when the sun began to set and neighbors gathered on their front porches to catch up on the day's events, Mrs. Chen would deliberately raise her voice so everyone within earshot could hear her complaints. "What kind of wife is this who can't even give me grandchildren?" she would announce to anyone who would listen. "In our family, babies come easily, but this one sits around like a withered tree." Maya would force a smile and walk past with her head down, but inside her chest, her heart burned with humiliation. David, who sometimes witnessed these public displays, would chuckle and say, "Mom, give her time. Maybe it's just not her season yet." But his tone made the neighbors laugh even harder, and the shame cut deeper into Maya's soul. Inside the house, the disrespect continued. Lisa would enter Maya's room without knocking, taking her clothes and jewelry as if they belonged to her. When Maya tried to object, Lisa would snap back, "You should thank me for even wearing your things since you can't give my brother children. At least someone can make good use of them." Whenever Maya reported these incidents to David, he would wave them away dismissively. "She's young and immature. Just ignore her," he'd say, as if the constant violation of her privacy and dignity was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. As months turned into years, it became painfully clear to Maya that her voice didn't matter in this household. She was treated like furniture, present but insignificant, seen but not heard. The pressure intensified when David began staying out late, claiming he was working overtime at the insurance office, but returning home with the lingering scent of expensive perfume that wasn't hers. Although she suspected he was seeing other women, Maya swallowed her tears and kept her suspicions to herself. Whenever she gathered the courage to ask about his whereabouts, David would explode in anger. "Do you have to question everything I do? If you had given me children by now, maybe I'd want to spend more time at home." Those words stung like acid, and Maya often cried herself to sleep while David snored peacefully beside her, completely unburdened by the pain he had caused. Night after night, she lay awake wondering how long she could endure this treatment, how much more of herself she could lose before there was nothing left. The breaking point came on an ordinary Tuesday evening. Maya had gone outside to collect the mail when she overheard Lisa talking with her college friends under the oak tree in their front yard. One of them casually asked when David would finally divorce Maya and marry someone who could give him children. Lisa laughed loudly, making sure her voice carried. "Soon enough. My brother is already talking to this amazing woman from his office. A real woman who can give us strong, healthy children, not like Maya who just takes up space like a ghost." The group erupted in laughter, and Maya stood frozen, the mail scattered at her feet. She walked back into the house slowly, her legs feeling like lead. Once in her bedroom, she closed the door, fell to her knees, and pressed her palms together as tears streamed down her face. "God of my ancestors," she whispered, "I have been silent for too long. I have endured too much shame and humiliation. They see my quietness as weakness. They think they can push me out of my marriage and replace me with another woman. But if I remain silent, they will bury me alive in this house." She paused, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "I will not fight them with fists. I will not fight them with screaming. Instead, I will show them madness. And in my madness, I will reveal who they really are." Maya rose to her feet slowly and looked at herself in the mirror. Her reflection appeared dull and defeated, but something new flickered in her eyes, a spark of determination that had been buried under years of abuse. She was no longer the passive wife who absorbed every insult without response. She had become a woman who had reached her breaking point and was ready to fight for her place in the only way they would understand. Don't forget to like this video if you're enjoying Maya's story. What do you think she should do next? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more captivating stories. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. Chapter is coming up next. You won't want to miss what Maya does next. The next morning, Maya woke before dawn with a strange sense of purpose. She moved quietly to the kitchen and began preparing breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast for David, just as she had done every morning for the past 3 years. But today, instead of seasoning the eggs carefully as she normally did, she poured an excessive amount of salt into the pan and stirred it with a mysterious smile playing on her lips. When David stumbled into the kitchen, still half asleep and checking his phone for work messages, Maya served him the plate with unusual enthusiasm. Her eyes sparkled with an energy he hadn't seen in months. "Eat, my dear husband," she said sweetly, her voice sing-song and cheerful. "The morning spirits blessed this meal especially for you." David barely looked up from his phone as he scooped a large forkful of eggs into his mouth. The moment the food hit his tongue, he coughed violently and spat it across the table. "Maya, what the hell is wrong with you? Are you trying to poison me? Who puts this much salt in eggs?" Maya giggled like a child and clapped her hands together in delight. "The spirits demanded salt, David. They were so hungry for taste. They whispered to me all night, telling me exactly how to prepare your food. Should I not listen to them?" David stared at her for a moment, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips. Then he burst into nervous laughter, shaking his head. "Okay, very funny. You're doing some weird comedy routine now? Please don't start your day with jokes, Maya. I don't have time for this." He pushed the plate away and stood up, grabbing his briefcase. But before he could leave the kitchen, Mrs. Chen entered, her silk robe wrapped tightly around her small frame. The smell of oversalted eggs had drifted through the house. "What is this nonsense?" she demanded, wrinkling her nose. "I can smell the salt from my bedroom. Maya, don't you know how to cook simple eggs? How did David ever think you were suitable for marriage?" Maya turned to face her mother-in-law with a perfectly straight expression. Then she smiled in a way that made Mrs. Chen step backward involuntarily. "Oh, Mother Chen, don't worry at all," Maya said in a dreamy voice. "The ancestors tasted the eggs with me before I served them. They sat right here at this table and told me the salt was perfect. They said it reminded them of the tears they cried when they were alive." Mrs. Chen's eyes widened. "Ancestors? What ancestors? Maya, what are you talking about?" Maya suddenly burst into loud, uncontrolled laughter that echoed through the kitchen and into the hallway. "The ancestors who sit in the corners of our rooms at night, watching everyone sleep. I talk to them regularly now. We've become such good friends. They tell me the most interesting stories about this family." David slapped his forehead and laughed, though there was a nervous edge to it. "Mom, I think all your years of criticism have finally made her snap. Maybe she's having some kind of breakdown." But Mrs. Chen wasn't laughing. She took another step backward and muttered under her breath, "Lord, protect us from evil spirits." Later that afternoon, Lisa came home from her part-time job at the boutique and headed straight for the kitchen to grab her usual afternoon snack. Maya was sitting on a stool, staring out the window and humming a tune that sounded like something played at funerals. Without looking at Lisa, Maya spoke in a flat, matter-of-fact voice. "You should return the money you stole from Mother Chen's jewelry box before the spirits decide to punish you with sickness." Lisa dropped her water bottle, and it clattered across the tile floor. "What did you just say? What money? Who told you such lies?" Maya slowly turned to face her sister-in-law, her eyes unusually wide and unblinking. "They told me, Lisa. The ancestors showed me everything. They said you hid the money in a small white envelope under your mattress. They also told me about the credit card you've been using without permission." Lisa's face went pale, and her lips began to tremble. "Maya, you're insane. Completely insane. Who do you think you are, making up stories about me? She stormed out of the kitchen, but Maya could see the fear in her eyes. The truth was, Maya had simply observed Lisa's behavior over the months. The new clothes that appeared without explanation, the way she avoided looking at Mrs. Chen when money was mentioned, and the small white envelope Maya had glimpsed while Lisa was hastily cleaning her room. That evening, when David returned home with 2 colleagues from his insurance office, Maya entered the living room carrying a tray of drinks. Instead of serving them normally, she placed the glasses on the coffee table and bowed 3 times toward the empty corner of the room. "I greet you, spirits of this house," she said in a ceremonial voice. "Please bless these drinks and protect these men from their own secrets." David's colleagues exchanged confused glances while David forced a laugh. "Guys, you see what I'm dealing with? My wife has decided to become some kind of spiritual medium. Maybe I should set up a shrine in the backyard so she can hold seances." His friends laughed nervously, but Maya noticed how quickly they finished their drinks and left. As they gathered their things, she heard one whisper to the other, "Man, that's not normal behavior. Maybe you should get her some help." Maya smiled to herself as she collected the empty glasses. The seed of doubt had been planted. Soon, everyone would begin to question what was real and what was performance. And in that uncertainty, she would find her power. By the 3rd week of Maya's strange behavior, her reputation had spread throughout Cedar Heights like wildfire. She no longer walked with the measured, careful steps of a dutiful wife. Instead, she wandered the neighborhood barefoot, her hair deliberately disheveled, wearing her clothes loosely as she sang old hymns that sent shivers down the spines of everyone who heard her. Sometimes she would stop suddenly in the middle of the street, clap her hands sharply, and appear to be giving instructions to invisible companions. "Sit down, all of you," she would command the empty air. "Today we will judge the truth-tellers from the liars." The change was so dramatic that even children who used to run to her for the cookies she kept in her library desk now crossed the street when they saw her coming. Parents pulled their kids closer and whispered warnings about staying away from "that woman who talks to ghosts." One night, as the full moon cast long shadows across Cedar Heights, Maya's screams pierced the quiet neighborhood. David, who had been watching television in the living room, rushed to their bedroom to find her thrashing on the bed, clutching her throat and sobbing. "Leave me alone," she cried to the ceiling. "You can't strangle me. I belong to the spirits now, not to you." "Maya! Maya, stop this madness!" David shouted, grabbing her shoulders and shaking her. But she only laughed in his face, her eyes wide and unblinking. "They're coming for you, David," she whispered in a voice that didn't sound like her own. "You think they don't know about your evening visits? You think they don't see where you go when you tell me you're working late?" David staggered backward, his face draining of color. What nonsense are you saying?" But his hands were already sweating, because Maya had mentioned things she couldn't possibly know. Or could she? The following morning, Mrs. Chen arrived at the house with Pastor Williams, a tall man in flowing white robes who was known throughout the community for his spiritual healing services. Word had already spread that David's wife had been possessed by demons, and a crowd of neighbors gathered outside to witness what they expected would be a dramatic exorcism. "Pastor, please deliver my son's wife. Mrs. Chen pleaded loudly enough for everyone to hear. "She has been taken over by evil spirits. She will bring shame to our family if nothing is done." Pastor Williams raised his hands and commanded Maya to sit before him for prayer. But Maya smiled mischievously and sat cross-legged on the grass instead, plucking dandelions and humming softly to herself. As the pastor began his prayers, Maya suddenly lifted her head and stared directly into Mrs. Chen's eyes. Her voice dropped to a low growl that made several neighbors step backward. "Mother Chen," she said slowly, "why did you sell Grandmother Chen's antique furniture and hide the money from David? Don't you know that the spirits see everything? They watched you sign those papers at the auction house when no one else was around. They told me the exact amount, $8,000. The entire crowd fell silent. Mrs. Chen's face turned ashen, and her lips began to tremble uncontrollably. What lies are these?" she stammered. "Maya, shut your mouth this instant." But the neighbors moved closer, their expressions shifting from amusement to suspicion. Maya wasn't finished. She turned her attention to Lisa, who had been hiding behind her mother, trembling. Maya's eyes gleamed as she began to sing in a childlike voice. "Shopping in the night, spending money that's not right. Designer bags and fancy shoes, bought with someone else's dues." Lisa's entire body went rigid, and her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Maya, enough," she screamed. "You're possessed. You're evil." But her face revealed her guilt as clearly as if she had confessed out loud. Pastor Williams dropped his prayer book in shock. "How can a woman afflicted by madness know such specific things?" he muttered to himself, genuinely puzzled. David looked back and forth between his mother and sister, confusion and anger battling in his chest. "Mom, Lisa, is there something you two haven't told me?" "Don't listen to this witch," Mrs. Chen shouted, but her voice was shaking. "She wants to destroy our family with lies. Pastor, please continue your work." But the damage was done. The neighbors had already begun murmuring among themselves, shaking their heads and exchanging knowing looks. Some of the older women nodded sagely and spoke of ancient proverbs about secrets that could never stay buried forever. The atmosphere in the crowd felt heavy, as if a storm was gathering right there among them. People began to disperse, but their conversations continued in hushed tones as they walked away. Maya had planted seeds of doubt that would grow and spread throughout the community. That night, Mrs. Chen couldn't sleep. Maya sat cross-legged on her bed, her hair wild and her eyes reflecting the moonlight streaming through the window. She leaned close to David and whispered with an innocent expression, "They laughed at me before, but now they're afraid. You can see it, can't you?" David pushed her away roughly. "If you don't stop this insanity, Maya, I swear." Maya interrupted him with that strange laugh that made the hair on his neck stand up. "Swear to whom, David? To me? Or to Sarah, the woman you visit in secret when you tell me you're working late at the insurance office?" David's body went completely still. The name Sarah hit him like a physical blow. How could she possibly know about Sarah, his colleague who had become much more than just a work friend? In a moment of panic, he slapped Maya across the face, but she only laughed harder, rocking back and forth as if she were enjoying the sting. Outside their bedroom window, neighbors who couldn't sleep were talking about the madness late into the night. "This isn't ordinary," one woman said to her husband. "Maya is no longer the woman we used to know. It's like she's become the voice of truth itself." By the time the next weekend arrived, the story of Maya's supernatural madness had spread far beyond Cedar Heights. People at the local grocery stores discussed her strange behavior, office workers gossiped about her during lunch breaks, and even teenagers made up songs mocking David's household, chanting, "Crazy Maya sees it all, watch out or you might fall." Although people laughed when they sang these songs, their laughter was hollow because deep down, everyone feared that Maya's words might not be empty madness but uncomfortable truths that the Chen family had tried desperately to bury. In the Chen household, the atmosphere had become toxic with suspicion and fear. Mrs. Chen, who once strutted around the house like a queen commanding her subjects, now kept her distance from Maya, watching her daughter-in-law from corners and doorways as if she were observing a dangerous wild animal. She could barely eat or sleep peacefully anymore because she lived in constant dread that Maya might suddenly burst into a room and mention the furniture money again in front of more witnesses. Already, several relatives had begun asking pointed questions about Grandmother Chen's antique collection and other family finances that had mysteriously disappeared over the years. The wall of secrecy that Mrs. Chan had built around her financial dealings was crumbling, one suspicious comment at a time. Lisa no longer had the courage to mock Maya or even remain in the house for extended periods. She spent most evenings at her boyfriend's apartment downtown, but even there she couldn't escape the anxiety that followed her like a persistent shadow. Maya had an uncanny ability to sing songs that matched her secrets with frightening accuracy. One evening when the house was quiet, Lisa returned late and tiptoed into the kitchen to grab a late-night snack. As she bent down to open the refrigerator, she heard a soft, melodic voice behind her. She spun around and saw Maya sitting in the dark corner of the kitchen, barely visible in the moonlight filtering through the window. "He will not marry you, Lisa," Maya sang softly, her voice eerily calm. "He will discard you like yesterday's newspaper. He has already made the same promises to another girl from his college. The same sweet words he whispered in your ear last night." Lisa's entire body began to shake. "What do you mean? How do you know where I was tonight?" Maya smiled mysteriously. "They show me everything, Lisa. They always show me. Would you like me to sing the exact song you hummed while you were getting dressed in his bedroom?" Lisa screamed and ran from the kitchen, nearly tripping over her own feet in her haste to escape. From that night forward, she refused to sleep in the same house as Maya, moving in with an aunt who lived across town. Meanwhile, David was rapidly losing his grip on the confidence that had once defined his personality. The proud man who used to mock his wife now moved through his days like a restless spirit, haunted by Maya's mention of Sarah's name. The secret relationship he thought no one knew about had somehow become known to his supposedly insane wife. One evening, while David sat on the front porch with his buddies drinking beer and trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy, Maya emerged from the house looking disheveled and wild. She stood in front of the group silently until their conversation died and an uncomfortable tension filled the air. "What is it now, Maya?" David snapped, trying to sound authoritative in front of his friends. Maya tilted her head and smiled in that unsettling way that had become her trademark. "Tell them, David. Tell them about Sarah. Tell them how you promised to leave me and rent her that expensive apartment downtown. Tell them how you said I was just a mistake you needed to correct. Or should I call on the spirits to tell the story themselves?" David leaped to his feet, fury and panic coursing through his veins. "Woman, shut your mouth right now." But his friends were already shifting uncomfortably and exchanging meaningful glances. One of them muttered under his breath, "How does she know about Sarah?" Another shook his head and said, "This isn't normal, man. Maybe she really is seeing things from somewhere else." David pushed Maya roughly, but she only laughed and staggered backward dramatically. Then she began clapping her hands slowly and rhythmically. "You cannot erase the truth, David. They are always watching you, even when you think you're alone." His friends quickly made excuses and left, leaving David sitting alone with his hands pressed against his temples as his carefully constructed facade crumbled like a house built on sand. From that night onward, the fear of Maya's revelations began eating away at David like a slow-acting poison. He stopped bringing friends to the house. He stopped speaking to Maya with his former arrogance. Even when he did insult her in moments of frustration, he did so with trembling lips, as if he expected her to expose another devastating secret at any moment. By now, Maya, the same woman who had once been mocked, silenced, and humiliated, had suddenly become the center of everyone's attention and, strangely, their respect. The neighbors who had once laughed at her now began bringing her small gifts in secret. One elderly woman approached her with a plate of homemade cookies and said, "Maya, your enemies are in your own house, but God has given you powerful sight. Use it wisely." Another neighbor actually knelt before Maya one afternoon and pleaded, "Please pray for my sick daughter. People say you can see things that others cannot." Maya simply smiled and continued her performance, because she knew her strategy was working perfectly. The fear of her words had become the beginning of wisdom for David and his family. Mrs. Chen, who once opened her mouth like a loudspeaker broadcasting every criticism, now barely spoke above a whisper for fear of being publicly disgraced. Lisa had permanently fled to her aunt's house, leaving her room empty like an abandoned shrine. David, meanwhile, had become a shadow of his former self. He no longer stumbled into the house late at night smelling of another woman's perfume. Instead, he returned home early and sat quietly in the living room like a defendant waiting for his verdict to be read. Sometimes Maya would deliberately hum old funeral songs while pacing through the rooms, and David would shift nervously in his chair as if her voice were a blade cutting through his composure. The revolution was nearly complete, but Maya knew she needed one final, decisive move to cement her victory permanently. One rain-soaked night, as thunder rolled across Cedar Heights and lightning illuminated the windows, David finally reached his breaking point. He entered their bedroom where Maya sat cross-legged on the bed, her hair loose and wild, her eyes reflecting the storm's flashes like mirrors. Unable to bear the psychological pressure any longer, David dropped to his knees in front of his wife, something that would have been unimaginable just months earlier. "Maya, please," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "Please forgive me. I didn't realize your connection to the spiritual world was so powerful. I thought you were weak, insignificant. But now I see that I'm the one who is nothing. Please, I'm begging you to forgive me." Maya stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable in the dim light. Then she leaned forward, bringing her face close to his. "When they insulted me, you laughed," she said quietly. "When they mocked me, you encouraged them. When they trampled on my dignity, you held their hands and helped them step on me harder. Now you kneel before me because you fear the truth that the spirits might reveal. Tell me, David, do you love me, or do you only love your fear of exposure?" David's lips trembled as he tried to speak, but only tears emerged. The proud insurance agent had been reduced to a broken man, terrified of his own wife's mysterious knowledge. The next morning brought an even more shocking transformation. As Mrs. Chen began her usual morning routine of criticizing Maya for some trivial household matter, David suddenly stood up from his chair and shouted at his mother for the first time in his adult life. "Mother, enough," he bellowed. "Not one more word against my wife. If you insult her again, you'll answer directly to me." The house fell completely silent. Neighbors who were passing by stopped in their tracks, stunned to hear David raise his voice against the matriarch of the family. Mrs. Chen's eyes widened in disbelief. "David, are you speaking to me this way? Because of this woman?" "Yes, Mother," David shouted again, his voice carrying through the neighborhood. "Because of her. This woman you call insane has shown me more truth than anyone else in this family ever has. She's revealed who my real enemies are, even within my own household." Mrs. Chen's mouth opened, but no words came out. She turned and walked to her room, her shoulders sagging under the weight of her defeat. That evening, something unprecedented happened. David followed Maya into the kitchen, something he had never done in all their years of marriage. She was peeling vegetables and humming softly to herself, as had become her habit. "Maya, let me help you," he said, picking up a knife and beginning to slice alongside her. "You shouldn't have to work alone anymore." Maya paused and looked at him with narrowed eyes. "So the spirits have finally pushed David into the kitchen? Miracles never cease." David attempted a nervous smile. "I want to change everything. I'll do anything to make this right. Just, please help me understand how to make the voices stop." Maya laughed and shook her head. "Help you? Only the spirits themselves can help you now, David. Should I call them for you?" She raised her voice dramatically. "Oh, spirits of truth and justice. David is asking for your assistance. Will you come?" David swallowed hard and backed away like a scolded child. "Never mind, I don't need help anymore." Maya smiled inwardly, seeing how completely terrified David had become. But she knew the game couldn't continue indefinitely. If she pushed her performance too far, people might become suspicious and turn against her. If she ended it too abruptly, the entire act would lose its transformative power. She needed a finale that would secure her position permanently and settle all accounts once and for all. When David suggested that a major healing service be held at their church to pray for Maya's condition, she smiled secretly because she realized the perfect stage had been set for her grand conclusion. On the appointed Sunday, the church was packed beyond capacity. Word had spread throughout the entire community that David's wife, who had been communicating with spirits, would receive prayers for deliverance. Mrs. Chan sat stiffly in the front row. Lisa had reluctantly returned for the occasion, and David stood near the altar, sweating nervously while Maya stood before the congregation, counting on her fingers and appearing to converse with invisible entities. The pastor raised his voice in fervent prayer, calling upon heaven to free Maya from whatever forces had possessed her. At precisely the right moment, Maya let out a piercing cry, fell to her knees, clutched her chest, and rolled dramatically across the floor. The congregation gasped in amazement. Some shouted "Hallelujah!" while others stepped back in fear and wonder. Maya allowed her body to convulse violently for several moments. Then, suddenly, she went completely still and began breathing in ragged gasps, as if some tremendous burden had been lifted from her spirit. When she finally rose to her feet, her eyes were filled with tears, and her gentle voice had returned to its natural tone. "Where am I?" she asked, looking around with genuine seeming confusion. "What happened? Why am I on the floor?" The congregation erupted in shouts of praise and thanksgiving. "She's healed. Glory be to God. The spirits have released her." David rushed to her side, gathered her in his arms, and soaked her shoulder with his tears of relief. "Maya, my beloved wife, you've come back to us. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you for bringing her back." Maya leaned weakly against him and asked with apparent innocence, "Did I do something wrong? Did I bring shame to our family?" David shook his head vigorously and held her even tighter. "No, Maya. You saved me. You saved all of us." That evening, when the house had grown quiet and the last of the well-wishing neighbors had gone home, the true consequences of Maya's months-long performance began to unfold like a carefully planned chess match reaching its conclusion. Mrs. Chen sat alone in her room, defeated and diminished. News about the furniture money she had secretly sold had spread throughout their extended family, and relatives had given her an ultimatum: produce the documentation for the sales or return every stolen dollar. Her reign as the family's unquestioned authority had ended permanently. Lisa, who had once strutted through the house with arrogant confidence, now moved quietly and kept her eyes downcast. Her boyfriend's infidelity had become public knowledge throughout their social circle, and she no longer dared to mock Maya or even maintain eye contact with her former victim. David himself had been completely transformed. He no longer spent evenings drinking with friends or returning home late smelling of another woman's perfume. He began shielding Maya from any criticism as if her honor was the very foundation of his existence. He lived in constant fear that any mistreatment might provoke the spirits to return and reveal even more damaging secrets. He even stood before his mother and sister one morning and delivered an ultimatum that cemented Maya's victory. "From this day forward, if anyone insults my wife, they insult me directly. This is her home, and she will be treated with complete respect. Anyone who cannot live with that arrangement should pack their belongings and leave immediately." The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Mrs. Chen sighed deeply and walked away, knowing she had lost the war completely. Maya had achieved total victory. She had worn madness like a suit of armor to fight a battle that words and tears alone could never have won. Gradually, she returned to her normal behavior, sweeping, cooking with proper seasoning, greeting neighbors politely. But everything had fundamentally changed. No one dared to mock her anymore. No one called her barren or worthless. Even young women in the neighborhood now greeted her with respect, bowing their heads as they passed by. She had transformed from the family scapegoat into a woman whose very presence commanded reverence and caution. The quiet librarian had discovered that sometimes the most powerful weapon against cruelty is not resistance, but the strategic embrace of the very thing your enemies fear most: unpredictability, truth, and the suggestion that someone might be watching and remembering every injustice. Maya had won her war not through violence or vengeance, but through the most sophisticated psychological campaign her tormentors could never have anticipated. She had turned their own fears and guilty consciences into the instruments of her liberation. In the end, if only they had known the true reason for her madness, they might have treated her with kindness from the beginning. But perhaps some people only learn respect through fear, and some battles can only be won by those brave enough to appear to lose their minds in order to save their souls. What an incredible journey! Maya's psychological mastermind strategy paid off completely. Did you see that ending coming? Smash that like button if this story blew your mind. Subscribe to our channel for more amazing psychological thrillers and inspiring stories of people who refuse to be defeated. Share this video with everyone. They need to see how Maya turned the tables on her bullies. What did you think of Maya's strategy? Was it brilliant, or did she go too far? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, remember, sometimes the quietest person in the room is planning the loudest victory. Thanks for watching.